"Move it, Grandpa." The shout snapped through the air before Joseph could react. One of the delivery bikers clipped him hard with a shoulder as he sped past the curb, sending the old man stumbling forward. His cane slipped. His knees hit the pavement. His backpack tore open on impact. A faded black and white photograph fluttered out along with a small metal pin. A delivery box rolled right over the corner of the picture. Joseph didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just stayed there on his hands and knees, gathering what the world had scattered without care. The boys laughed as they rode off. No one stepped in. A group of students looked away. A school security guard crossed his arms and did nothing. A little boy stared. His mother pulled his arm and whispered, "Come on. Don't get involved. If you believe no man who served should be treated like this, type respect below." Joseph Cole pulled himself up slowly, one palm on the sidewalk, the other gripping the edge of the broken bench. His knee trembled, but he stood without asking for help. The photo was creased now. He smoothed it against his leg. It showed a young mechanic kneeling beside an old F4 Phantom, grease on his sleeves, a proud grin under the southern sun. The pin beside it was a faded Air Force insignia, one he'd worn through the last 2 years of Vietnam. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He knew. Everyone was. And no one did a thing. Joseph adjusted the strap on his backpack, now frayed and stained from the fall, and walked, slow but steady, toward the bus stop across the street. He stood alone at the shelter. 5 minutes later, the same group of young men came coasting up on their bikes again, circling lazily. The one with the loud voice, the ringleader, tilted his head as if recognizing him. "Well, well," he smirked, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The Air Force antique's still walking. Joseph said nothing. The second one leaned on his handlebars and pointed at the patch on Joseph's backpack. "What's that? His old dog tag?" Without waiting for an answer, he reached out and yanked the patch off. It tore with a crack of Velcro, leaving behind loose threads and silence. Joseph looked at the torn spot, then down at the patch in the boy's hand. It was a small square of fabric embroidered with faded letters. Cole, Crew Chief, Da Nang. "Trash," the boy said, and let it fall. The others snickered. People saw it. A woman waiting for the bus shifted awkwardly, glancing down at her phone. A man with a briefcase turned his back, pretending to check his watch. Nobody moved. Joseph reached down slowly and picked up the patch, brushing the dust from it with his thumb. He still didn't speak. The boys lingered a moment longer, throwing glances at the bystanders, almost daring someone to step in. No one did. One of the teens mimicked a limp, dragging one leg in mockery. Another snapped a photo and laughed. Joseph turned his back to them, straightened his spine as best he could, and sat down at the edge of the bench. The patch rested in his open palm. His other hand clutched the cane resting between his knees. The wind shifted. The riders drifted away. The woman who had looked at her phone finally lifted her eyes. But Joseph wasn't looking at anyone anymore. He just stared forward, eyes calm, chest rising slow. Not one word, not one glance back. The bus was late. Joseph stayed seated, his cane across his lap, his fingers slowly folding the patch back into a square, the way he used to pack his gear before dawn. He heard them before he saw them. The bikes rolled back, tires crunching against grit. One of the boys tossed a plastic bottle toward the trash can, and missed. The bottle bounced once, then rolled and came to rest right at Joseph's foot. "Oh, my bad," said the ringleader, not moving to pick it up. Joseph didn't flinch. "You deaf now too?" Another jeered. Guess he left his hearing in Nam. Someone laughed. Another student, maybe 17, pulled out his phone and started recording, whispering, "Yo, check this out." The boy who'd mocked the patch stepped closer. "Hey, Gramps, that patch have magic powers or something? Why are you still holding it like it's gold?" Joseph looked up. Not angry, not pleading, just steady. "It's not for you," he said quietly, then looked away. "Wrong," the boy snapped. "Nothing out here belongs to you anymore." He stepped forward and knocked the patch from Joseph's hand. It fluttered to the pavement again, landing near a piece of old gum and an oil stain. A couple passing by turned their heads at the sound, but only for a second. They kept walking. Inside the bus shelter, a mother pulled her young daughter a little closer. The boy picked up the patch again, and this time flung it into the street. "Go fetch it, old man." Joseph's lips parted slightly. His breath caught just for a moment. Then he stood, slow and careful, and stepped off the curb with the same deliberation he used when he used to inspect an engine bay, like each movement mattered. He walked into the street and bent down, ignoring the honk of a distant car. A small pickup slowed, watching, then moved on. Joseph retrieved the patch, brushed it clean once more, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Over his heart. When he turned back, the boys were now lounging on the bench. One had stretched across it, arms out wide like he owned the world. Joseph stopped beside them, standing, silent. One of them sneered. "What? Gonna call your war buddies now?" He didn't respond. He simply reached into the front pocket of his backpack, pulled out a sewing kit, worn, almost empty, and sat on the edge of the bench. With slow fingers, he began to sew the patch back onto the bag. One stitch, then another, threading, pulling, tying, like he was repairing something more than fabric. The boys watched, confused, then bored. "Whatever, man. You're weird," one muttered. They stood and rode off again, tires squealing against concrete, their laughter fading down the block. Joseph finished the last knot, cut the thread with a flick of his thumb, and pressed the patch flat. The street was quiet again, except for the eyes, the phones, the ones who had seen it all, and still did nothing. Joseph sat there for a long time, the last stitch still pressed under his thumb. He didn't move, didn't look around. The light shifted. A cloud passed over the sun. Still he remained, a fixed point in a world that had chosen to drift. Then slowly he reached into the side pouch of his backpack and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was yellowed at the edges, the kind that had been opened and closed too many times. He unfolded it with care. A name was handwritten at the top. Below it, a number. Below that, an address scribbled with precise, blocky letters. He nodded to himself, folded the paper once more, and rose. His legs wobbled, but the resolve was steady. His cane tapped once on the sidewalk, then again. The Orrell home stood across the street, an old public payphone that had survived renovations, modernizations, and indifference. It was cracked. Graffiti curled around the side, but it still worked. Joseph stepped into the booth, closed the door gently, and picked up the receiver. He pulled a coin from his shirt pocket and inserted it. He dialed the number by heart. 1 ring. 2. Guardsman Station, Corporal Marks speaking. "This is Joseph Cole," he said simply. "Request to speak with Captain Vaughn." A pause. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes." "1 moment, sir." Silence. Then a different voice came on, lower, controlled. "Cole? Joseph Cole?" "That's right." Another pause. "What's the situation?" Joseph didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain the insults. He didn't recount the fall. He didn't mention the patch, the laughter, or the silence of the others. He simply said, "I was disrespected. On King Street, outside the vocational school, 3 boys. They tore my patch, threw it in the street." He breathed in, and they laughed. Silence stretched on the line. Then Vaughn replied, voice clipped and ice cold, "You injured, sir?" "Just bruised." "They still there?" "They come and go." "I'll handle it." "I know." Joseph hung up. He stepped out of the booth and walked back across the street. He sat again on the bench, his eyes on the corner where the boys had disappeared. He didn't wait for applause, or attention, or payback. He waited because it was the right thing to do, because somewhere out there a man still believed in values Joseph had bled for. A man who hadn't forgotten. A man who would come. It didn't take long. 17 minutes later, the rhythm of the street changed. The sound didn't announce itself. It didn't need to. A black SUV pulled up slowly, stopping just beyond the alley entrance behind the school. Then another vehicle. Then a third, this one marked only by a small emblem on the door. State Guard. Civil Liaison Unit. Out stepped 5 uniformed guardsmen. No riot gear, no weapons drawn. Just clean, pressed uniforms and the kind of posture that made people quiet. Leading them was a man in a dark blue short-sleeve service shirt, 2 stripes on his collar, and silver gray at his temples. Captain Vaughn. He walked like someone who knew weight of duty, of memory, of debt. He crossed the street alone. Joseph didn't rise, didn't speak. Vaughn stopped directly in front of him, and then, without a word, brought his hand up in a perfect, precise salute. Joseph looked up, returned it, just as clean, just as sharp. Vaughn spoke, voice low. "They tore your patch?" Joseph nodded once. "And your dignity?" Joseph didn't answer. He didn't have to. Vaughn turned, eyes already scanning the street. He spotted the 3 boys laughing near the corner store, still proud, still loud. The guardsmen moved as one. No rush, no shouts. They walked down the sidewalk, parting the passers-by like water around stone. The boys noticed too late. One tried to turn and duck into the alley. A guardsman was already there. Vaughn didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Gentlemen, sit." The tone was all it took. They sat. Around them, the street began to hush. The laughter faded, phones tilted up. The woman from the bus stop watched now. So did the man with the briefcase. The kid who'd filmed before lowered his phone. No one said a word. Vaughn stepped forward, his voice steady but ringing with a kind of discipline that couldn't be faked. "This man," he said, pointing to Joseph without looking back, "was serving in uniform while your parents were still in grade school. He built jet engines with hands steadier than yours will ever be." One of the boys opened his mouth. "Don't," Vaughn cut him off. "You already said enough today." He crouched slightly, bringing himself to their eye level. "You think being loud makes you strong. It doesn't. Respect does." He stood again. "You disrespected the patch, the name, the silence." Then, to the guardsmen, "Remind them what that patch means." For the next 5 minutes, the boys sat stone still while each guardsman took a turn, explaining calmly what service costs, what it demands, and what it gives back. Nobody shouted, but every word landed. At the end, Vaughn looked back at Joseph. "Sir, would you like to press charges?" Joseph shook his head. "I just wanted someone to remember what that patch stood for." Vaughn nodded. "They will." Then he turned back to the boys and gave the last order of the day. "Stand, apologize, and walk away with your heads down." They did. Their eyes didn't rise once. If you believe leadership means defending the silent, subscribe now. The street slowly returned to motion. Cars passed. A dog barked down the block. But something had shifted, something quiet and lasting. Joseph remained on the bench, unmoving. He wasn't watching the boys anymore. He was watching the silence they'd left behind. Captain Vaughn approached once more. "We'll make sure they don't forget this day." Joseph gave a slow nod. "Neither will I." The captain extended something folded. It was Joseph's patch, cleaned, pressed, with new stitching along the edges. Joseph took it in his hands, tracing the thread with his fingertip. "You didn't have to do this," he said softly. "We always do this," Vaughn replied. "For our own." He gave a brief nod to his team, and the guardsmen turned back toward their vehicles. No fanfare, no applause. Just discipline and purpose fading into the afternoon sun. A few steps away, the boy who'd been filming earlier stood awkwardly, his phone now at his side. He took a breath and walked toward the bench. He didn't speak. But he bent down, picked up the plastic bottle that had been thrown earlier and dropped it into the trash. Then he looked at Joseph, nodded once, and left. Joseph exhaled. Later that week, a city crew arrived at the bus stop. Without announcement, they removed the cracked bench and replaced it with a sturdier one. Wood and steel, smooth varnish, no graffiti. But the real change wasn't in the bench. It was in the small brass plaque bolted onto its side. Clean lettering, nothing fancy. Just 5 words, reserved for quiet strength. No name, no date. But anyone who had been there knew. That Saturday, Joseph returned. Same time, same route, slower steps. He wore his patched backpack. The photo was still in his shirt pocket. He sat on the new bench without ceremony, as if it had always been his. As he adjusted his cane at his side, a little girl passed with her mother. She stopped, stared at the plaque, then at Joseph. Her mother started to tug her away, but the girl turned and saluted, clumsy, crooked, sincere. Joseph smiled. Not wide, not forced, just enough. He returned the salute. The girl grinned and skipped to catch up. The breeze moved through the trees. Joseph sat back, closed his eyes for a moment, and breathed. He wasn't invisible anymore. Not today. They stepped on his patch. They laughed at his silence. But honor stood up. If you typed respect, if you subscribed when leadership showed up, thank you. Stories like his are why this channel exists.